Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. I need to add an addendum to the other video of Left and Right Unite, because there's a very important part that I need to hit. I hit it indirectly, but it needed to be hit squared on. I have this song in my head, Pink Floyd, Us and Them. It's like us and them, and what is it? And at the end, we're all just ordinary men. That's a fascinating statement. That's a fucking awesome statement. Us and them. Meaning you're finding some disparity between yourself and them. Tribalism. We have our group, they have their group, and we're distinctions. Some distinction. Something. They're saying that we're different. And yet, at the end of all this, when we lay down at night, we're just ordinary men. You have those same currents in societies. Those same currents run through societies. This idea of tribalism, this us versus them, this is our pack, this is their pack. Your economic system is not separate and distinct from currents in your society that can inflame this idea of us and them. You, as a person, is not a separate and distinct factor. You never are a separate and distinct factor. Who you are, for the most part, is etched on and shaped by not just where you were born, raised, culture you're raised into, but societal forces. Societal forces. Meaning the things that you believe, the things that you want to say, espouse, how you feel. How you feel. In most respects it's not just you, it's also you soaking in the thing that you are in, this reality of sorts. What I'm getting at is, the factors that affect you in your particular society also affect your particular views and affects the perspective of people in that society. It does. I would say that's just a flat fact. I would say that's unimpeachable. In our particular case, in our society, we've had a complex history in the society, to say the least. You have one group of people, for the most part, that thought it was perfectly okay to own another group of people. That's fucking amazing to me. But nevertheless, as a society, all of us, we've grown past it. And growing past it, all of us, for the most part, have, when I'm saying growing past it, I just mean we're entangled. This is our entangled fate of sorts. And we still deal with the remnants of those decisions. We're still, for the most part, ensconced in perspectives that are not necessarily, that weren't necessarily started with us. I mean, let me put it that way. It's almost like history sticks to itself. Now, you have a political system where one party, for the most part, is party of multiculturalism, and the other party is, I would say, not. That's just data. You can dislike what I'm saying, but data-wise, it's absolutely true. Now, I'm not taking any particular position on why that multiculturalism or that divide exists. The point I want to make is economic forces inflame that divide. It makes it worse. So if you have two parties, one party for the most part has this multiculturalism thing, the other party for the most part has this this identity rooted in history, the past, and everything else. Let's say you have a lot of other emotional factors that for the most part are unacknowledged. And I don't just mean how people regard each other, how there's a societal thing of wanting people to behave a particular way. It's like a this kind of politically correct thing. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying how each one of us interact with the world and how each one of us as a culture interact with other cultures. All of us are American. So don't misunderstand me on that point. When I'm traveling around the globe, I don't come across as a black American. I come across as just an American. My mannerisms, the things that I say, the things that I do. Regardless of who you are in the country, for the most part, that will come across. When you're in the country itself, that's when the country itself starts looking for other distinctions. In this case, by race. And again, I'm making this point that the distinction by race is not something that I myself am coming up with. It's, if you look at the parties, if you look at the way the parties vote, it's there. There's no way to not see it. The only way to deal with this is regard it honestly. The point I want to make is, though, the severity of that and how intense that is, in many respects, is inflamed by the economic system itself. If the people in the country had the things that they needed to persist themselves, identity, for the most part, slides behind the scenes. Meaning, if you have, let's say Sanders, or Sanders-type candidate, he's talking about economics. There's an amazing, you have to ask the question, why was Sanders able to pull all these people in West Virginia, and why all these people in West Virginia voting Republican? That's an interesting question. If all those guys are voting Republican, there is no reason why anything Sanders should say should excite them, and yet it does. If you're having a conversation about economics, talking about people's livelihoods, their wallets, just about order of magnitude of the things that are more important to them, I guarantee you, their livelihood is a hell of a lot more important to them than these issues of identity. Democrats getting paid off in order to not have a conversation about the real issues that would adversely affect the people who are actually paying them off, who would adversely affect their donors, allowed the conversation to be taken to identity, because that's the only conversation at that point they can have. I'm a woman, I'm black, I'm Hispanic, I'm gay, vote for me. Vote for me. We're the party of multiculturalism. And if you don't vote for us, you're racist. Are you really not going to vote for us when the Republican Party is that bad? These are the arguments. These are the conversations. I'm making the point that if that's the conversation that you have to have, and that's the level of debate, then you're going to lose that debate. You're going to lose that debate. And as a point of fact, you have lost that debate. Thousands, like 1,000 Senate seats, or 1,000 legislative seats, all throughout the country. That's an amazing number. All branches of government, federal, state, and the judiciary. You've lost it all. And yet, that's the argument that you've had for the past 20 and 30 years. I'm saying you lose that argument on its face. The argument and the conversations you want to have are arguments that don't necessarily inflame these cultural schisms. It's unnecessary to have these cultural schisms flare up in a society this way. There will be things that will come up that would aggravate those tensions, yes. But if you're working 50, 60 hours a week, think about that. Your entire time for the most part is spent barely making ends meet. And you're hearing conversations about the border. Somebody says, hey, you need to strengthen the border to keep these other people from coming over illegally and taking our jobs. It's not true. That person doesn't necessarily want to be picking oranges. But are you telling me that argument may not necessarily resonate if somebody is not paying attention to politics and they're listening to somebody who they, for the most part, believe from a cultural identity standpoint? Are you telling me that argument doesn't resonate? Democrats always say, oh, those arguments are just ridiculous. Whether they're ridiculous or not, you need to engage those arguments. You need to have those conversations. The problem is, the conversation that you need to have that replaces that conversation is, I'm going to put more money in your pocket. The Republican Party is fucking you over economically, and they're getting paid by their donors to take on certain policies that are going to adversely affect you. And the policies that I'm going to espouse is going to increase your wages. It's going to make sure that your kids, your grandkids, your whoever in your particular family is going to be taken care of in regards to healthcare or education. We're no longer going to have a political process that's dominated by who has the biggest donors. That's the argument, and that's the conversation you need to have. To have that conversation, you need a certain amount of integrity to pull it off. The reason why Sanders could pull that off is because Sanders has a certain amount of integrity on that front. The Democratic Party does not. And the fact that you can't really have those arguments honestly, and you're stuck with this idea of identity, you've created a schism in the society. Get off identity politics. It's a loser. It's a loser on two fronts. It's a loser because it creates division within the society that you're talking about, where the society starts to break down in a sense of one identity versus another identity, and all of the other complex aspects and emotions of history that go involved into this idea of who I am, who do I perceive myself to be, who does my society tell me that I am. And you get down to brass tacks of, I don't care who you are. Here's a better opportunity for you and your family. Do you see the vast differences in those things? Meaning, I'll leave you to your devices in regards to culture, whatever else. I don't care. I don't need to understand you. I don't need you to understand me. What I do need to have a conversation about, and what I do need you to understand me on, is economically, all of us are for the most part in the same boat. The conversation that we should have is about class, not this thing of race or anything else. or identity in that sense. The conversation you need to have is about class. That's the argument. Now, once that argument leaves the table, when you're talking about Democrats moving further and further to the right, from the 40s to the 50s to the 60s to the 70s on, you've backed into a conversation purely on identity. And just as a point of fact, you lose that conversation. You lose it. You can't tell people how they should or shouldn't be. People just are. I don't necessarily have to like it, but I don't necessarily care one way or the other. What I do care about is, economically, are we going to have a country that's better for all of us? And allowing these conversations about identity create situations where you can have a minority, it's 1%, keep the other people fighting at each other's throats in order to maintain a status quo. The Democratic president passed a right-wing healthcare bill, and people thanked him and applauded him for it, as if, oh, thank you. I'm saying that's how far we moved to the right. And I'm saying if that right-wing healthcare bill started falling apart the moment it was passed, why aren't Social Security and Medicare hated in the same way? Like, why are people so ambivalent about Obamacare, but these other programs are massive majority in regards to people who approve? One was done right, or the other two were done right. They were done because they needed to work. Obamacare was done purely on the ideological lines. Again, a market-driven solution to healthcare. You're putting cash above people. The conversation that you want to have, if you want to get those people back, it's not on identity. It's not on this issue of, you know, we have a woman in this party and we're going to have the first vagina to be president. None of that shit. You focus on the things that matter to more people. You would never understand identity thing. Most people don't care, I don't imagine. But do they need to care? Why should they have to care? The only thing they really should care about is all of us economically, for the most part, in the same class, and our country should work for us. Period. So, I'll leave it at that. I don't like identity politics. I've said it before. And this level of identity politics has allowed the country to end up in the situation which it's in. The arguments are contrived. They're done purely for the sake of creating an argument and a distinction. It's for political gamesmanship. It's not for moving the country forward. These guys have fucking forgotten the point of politics. They've forgotten the point. And they're being bought off in this process of, here's cash, now go talk about something that doesn't adversely affect my profits. Well, we end up with a division in society that's a festering or healing wound at that point, depending on your perspective. Once the conversation leaves that, you're better off. What I would say is, the left and right on this front should unite. Honestly, when you're thinking about economic issues, the globalism issues, and all this other stuff, the differences are minor. When you're looking at a Venn diagram of the things that the left and right agree on or disagree on, those things are relatively minor. The parties themselves are different, and making a distinction between independents and sane conservatives and leftists and Democrats and Republicans. Those people, for the most part, are in it purely for the politics. I'm saying people being in it purely for ideological reasons or ideological beliefs that are honest and earnest and is not necessarily motivated by how much cash that's put in their pockets. I'm saying those people can come to some consensus on moving the country forward. The people that are in Washington, no. The Democrats and Republicans who affiliate with the party, maybe not. Maybe not. Those people, for the most part, go along party lines. I'm saying you shouldn't attach yourself to their model. That's all I'm saying. Let them die on the vine. You have less and less people voting. Unless somebody is supporting your interests, you shouldn't vote for them. I would argue creating some kind of summit of some underlying the political structure itself that says this is the lowest bar as a country we're willing to accept. And I make this point of saying whether that person is a Green, a Libertarian, a Republican, or a Democrat, or an independent, if that person is meeting your base level of values, meaning this is the lowest bar as a society we're willing to accommodate, or we're just not voting for any of the people who are not doing that, towing that line. You would eventually get to a point where, in order for people to get elected, they would have to toe a particular line. The underlying structure of the politics itself, meaning the summits themselves, become somewhat of a bulwark in trying to hold the public accountable, or hold these politicians accountable. Yeah, this is going off a slight tangent. I just want to make the point. These differences are minor, and these differences shouldn't necessarily be used to divide. And at the very least, there needs to be an understanding of what's taking place in regards to the politics in this point of identity, how it's used to create a wedge in that particular society, and engage it honestly. Why it can be used to put a wedge in society? Why do people break down into two camps along the lines of race and everything else? Engage it honestly. Engage it honestly. Like I'm just saying, these people run away from these type of conversations, and I understand why. Yeah, I understand why. It's like engaging this stuff honestly gets you a little bit further than being PC and dancing around certain things, as opposed to coming to some honest conclusion of, hey, why do I vote this particular party, or why do I vote that particular party? I suspect that what you will find if blacks vote Democrat, just period. We don't necessarily have this idea of two parties. This was the party. And whites have a tendency to vote Republican. Again, this is just in the data itself. The question becomes, why do those groups feel that they need to do that? And if you're going to tell me, well, they're just fiscally conservative, then why on earth did they vote for Donald Trump? Donald Trump was running against Republican dogma. So, I'll leave it at that. And this is not me wagging a finger. I'm just making this point that when you ask the question of how do you move the country forward, you don't move it forward by focusing on something that's somewhat unresolvable at the level of the people that they are, and then adding in this pressure pot of economics, of scarcity. You're not going to have enough to make ends meet. Now, fight for resources, that type of thing. It creates this kind of cauldron of antagonistic forces within that particular society. I'm saying that's unnecessary. It's contrived. You have the richest country on the planet. You have the resources that you need to do whatever you need to do in this particular country. So, I'll leave it at that. Alright guys, if you enjoy the content, feel free to share, subscribe. You can always support the work through Patreon. Thank you.